Hey there, and welcome to the Girl Means Business podcast, the show that's all about helping photographers just like you build a thriving business without sacrificing your sanity. I'm your host, Kendra Swalls, a former teacher turned full-time photographer and marketing coach, here to fill your earbuds each week with practical tips, real-life stories, and a whole lot of encouragement. So if you're ready to dive in, let's get to it because this girl means business. Hey friends, welcome back to the Girl Means Business podcast. Okay, we're going to have a little fun with this episode because it's summertime and I'm feeling a little playful. And I was having a conversation recently with a friend whose daughter is about to have their first baby. And she said that she was putting together like this little book of like parenting kind of things you would and wouldn't do again. And so she was asking, she's like, what are some things you would do differently if you were a first-time mom? Again, knowing what you know now. And so we had this really funny conversation about like all the things that, you know, we said about having kids before we actually had kids. And like, once you have kids, all that goes out the window. And even to this day, like there's still moments where, you know, if I'm talking to someone who has kids that are younger than mine and then hearing them like, talk about like, oh, well, when my kids are teenagers or when my kids are this, like, oh, I'm never going to do this or I'm not going to do that or, oh, my kids will be like this instead of like this. And I'm just kind of like quietly in my head going, okay, well, yeah, that's good and great, except that I thought those things too until I got to that point. So I thought it'd be really funny to take the same idea of what she was doing for her daughter's baby shower and take it and flip it into a photography edition. So things that I would wish I could go back and tell myself as a brand new baby photographer, knowing what I know now. Like, what would I do differently? What are some things I would maybe never do again? And share some funny stories along the way. So let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, one of the first things, if I could go back in time and tell myself to do differently from the beginning, is to not take on sessions, quote unquote, for exposure, because the number of times that came back to bite me in the butt versus actually being helpful to my business is way off balance. And a perfect example of this. So years ago, I would say this was back in 2014, 2015, back when blogging, like blog influencers were a big thing. So pre kind of Instagram influencers, you would have these women, these girls who would create these blogs and they would blog about like their, you know, different brands they wanted to work with, basically what they do now on Instagram, but in blog form. And I had a couple of them that had reached out to me at various times. There was really one in particular that she kind of reached out to me first. We started working together and then she would tell her other friends about it, or they would see her photos and ask her about it. So essentially it did kind of work, but not really, because none of them actually paid me hardly anything. So there was one in particular. It was not the main one I had worked with, but one of the people that she had kind of put me in touch with. And she had said, she's like, oh, I'm kind of an up and coming like blogger. I just really need some like content, but I promise I will spread your name like wildfire. I will tell everybody I know about it. I will, I'll tag you on everything, all the promises that she made at the time. And so I did multiple sessions with her. We did one at like the farmer's market in Dallas that was really cute. We did a couple of them like in my studio with different like brand items that she wanted to promote. We did some that were like, we went around different like little parts of downtown Grapevine. I mean, we like, and a lot of times it would even be, she would ask me for like reference, like, hey, do you know of anybody that has like a little boutique where we could advertise their clothing in my session? So I would put her in touch with people and say like, hey, I've got this blogger, this influencer. We're doing a photo shoot together. She's looking for some outfits to wear during her photo shoot that maybe she could use to advertise your store. And I remember this one time, like, she was young. I mean, she was like probably 17, 18, 19, 20, that age range. I would say probably 18 to 20. And there was one time that like we had kind of done a couple sessions together. And so I was like, yeah, just ride with me. We'll go, because we were hitting a couple different little spots. Well, she had borrowed some clothes from a friend of mine who owned a little boutique. And they were cute little dresses and short sets and stuff. And I remember like her changing in the back of my car. And at the end of the session, I opened the back of my car and all of the boutique clothes were just crumpled in piles all over the back of my car. And I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm like, this is not how you treat somebody else's clothes. This is not how you like I now have to like iron these outfits or steam these clothes to make them look nice again. Some of them she had like taken the tags off of, and it was just, and I never got paid for the sessions. And I really never got like actual paying clients from them. In fact, I know maybe one or two influencer type sessions that I have done for exposure. You can't see it, but I'm doing air quotes for exposure, ever actually paid off in me getting any kind of paying clients in return. So I would say like it definitely makes for funny stories, but it's something if I could go back in time, I would say, you know what? Exposure doesn't pay the bills. I am happy to do sessions for you. I will even consider doing discounted sessions in the beginning, but I will need to get paid for my sessions because doing something for exposure very rarely works out. Now, I will say with a little, exception here of there have been a couple of times where I've done with more reputable companies where I have done a kind of a for exposure thing, but it has actually resulted in some paying clients because the exposure was access to emails or access to get in touch with people that actually were my potential clients. So if you're looking to gain exposure, just know, do it wisely, and not everything is always going to pay off the way you think it's going to. Okay, the next thing that I would go back and tell my former photographer self, is stop trying to be like other people you see online. This is a common, and I think this is just because when you're starting off as a photographer, you don't fully know like what your style is, what your vision is for your brand. You're just trying to kind of figure things out. And I totally get that. Like there's definitely the good aspects of it, but I would definitely tell myself like, hey, just lean into what you like to do. Like, don't feel like that if this other photographer who is seemingly really successful has become successful doing this thing, that means that you can only be successful doing that thing as well. Because it's led me down some rabbit holes. It's led me down some following advice that was not always great advice because I thought that like, but if I want to be just like her, I have to do things just like her, even when it didn't match my personal style or personality or the way I wanted to run my business. And so my example for this is when I started getting into boudoir photography. And if you haven't heard the story, I'll tell it really quickly. So I kind of fell into boudoir photography by accident. So I had a client who I was going to photograph her wedding, and she messaged me, 2 or 3 months before her wedding. And she was like, hey, I really want to do some of those like sexy photos to give my fiance on our wedding day. She didn't know what they were called. I didn't know what they were called. She's like, could we maybe do some of those? Do you do those? And I was like, yeah, I do those. That sounds great. No clue. Literally was Googling, what are these? Like the night she texted me. I was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. I'll add it to your package. I did it for super cheap. I literally set it up in like the guest room of my house. And like even in like the front area of my house, I had a whole little setup. So I had 2 different little setups, one in the guest room, one in the front room. With like, I went to Hobby Lobby and bought like silk or satin stuff to hang on behind. And it was a whole crazy thing. But she brought her friend over. Her friend did her hair and makeup for her. We turned on music. She had a little bit of champagne. We had the best time. I had so much fun. And after that, I remember like I gave her the pictures, just I think literally on a CD because that's how long ago this was. And she printed them off somewhere and she put them in like a photo album for him, gave it to him on his wedding day. I photographed on their wedding day, like her giving him the book, but really didn't think much else of it. And then he had messaged me after the wedding and was like, thank you so much for doing that for her. Like I loved not only for me, but it made her feel really good to see her, the way that I see her. And that's really what got me. I was like, oh, I love this. Like I want more women to have that feeling. So that led me down into the boudoir space. Well, there is a wide range of boudoir photography, anywhere from like super mild, very conservative to like full on, like this will never fly on the internet kind of boudoir photography. I was somewhere on like a scale of like, if 1 is the most modest and 10 is the most extreme, I was probably like a 3, 4. And so my boudoir sessions were pretty tame for the most part. So I really fell in love with doing this. And I started looking at people who also were boudoir photographers and who were considered in that same kind of range of extreme, like conservative versus extreme that I was. So, and I even went to like a boudoir conference one time that was amazing. And I fell into like a couple of these photographers who I really, really loved their work. And they seemed incredibly successful and I wanted to follow everything they were doing. And I got sucked into one and I'd seen her at this conference and I started following her and I loved what she was doing. I loved her pictures. And then she was also doing the coaching and the mentoring. And so I started getting into like a small group coaching program with her. The problem is I found out really quickly that her style of marketing was very much the opposite of mine. Her style was kind of this bait and switch of, I'm going to offer them something that looks really enticing, but when they actually get into the studio, I'm going to flip it around and be like, oh, well, now you have to pay this amount in order to actually get any of the things that you want. And so, but I was so caught up in like this idea that I really wanted the success that she seemed to have, that I was willing to kind of lower my standards and change how I ran my business and do something that felt very uncomfortable to me. And the first couple of times I had people come in the studio under that guise of like, oh, it's this session price. And they came in and I was like, oh, but if you want to buy the pictures, you got to pay this. It just felt so icky. Like I just did not like that feeling. And I finally told her, I was like, look, I can't do things the way that you are doing them. And she essentially kind of kicked me out of her coaching program. She's like, well, if you don't like the way I'm doing things, then I'm not for you. And that's fine. But I learned my lesson that like, it's one thing to get inspiration from what other people do and the type of photos they have or the type of business model they have. It's another thing to try to emulate them to the point that you are losing your own identity or you are compromising your own standards in order to get something that they or follow a roadmap that they have created that may not always be the roadmap that fits for you. Like even with my own coaching and my own business, like I do things in a way that work for me. The fact that I don't post a lot on social media, that social media is not a big part of my marketing, it's a choice that I've made. It is not the choice that everybody needs to make. And I'm not ever going to come on here and say, this is the only way to be successful is to only do blogs and emails and, websites and things like that. Like I fully think that if you can be successful on social media, go do it. And I will highly encourage you to do that. I'm never going to say there's one way and only one way. But I think that there are a lot of people out there that do think that way and that do want you to think that their way is the only way. So if I were going back in time and I were telling like new photographer me advice, one of those pieces of advice would be very careful with who you are comparing yourself to and be very careful with who you are creating and modeling your business after, because it may not always be the best thing for you and your business. Okay, the third thing I would tell myself to do differently looking back is I would say don't take on sessions that you know you're not going to enjoy. Because too many times early on in my photography business did I agree to do sessions that I either A, knew I could not successfully provide quality like photos for, or that I was fully equipped to handle, and B, that I knew I was not going to want to do. So 2 examples of this. The first one was a newborn session. I have never wanted to be a newborn photographer. It was not something I ever was super interested in. My best friend that I started my photography business with, she loved newborns. She went on to do almost exclusively newborns for several years and did a beautiful job at newborns. I was never someone who was like, that is what I want to do. It intimidated me. I knew you had to have like trainings and you had to have equipment and you had to have all these things in order to successfully create a newborn session. However, because I was new and I just was looking to make money, one of my teaching colleagues was having a baby, and she asked me if I would take her maternity photos. And I was like, absolutely, I'll do your maternity photos. And then she was like, well, would you also do our newborn photos? And I, a lot of times people just don't know that you don't do all the things. And I was like, sure, yeah, I'll do them. Like, you're a friend. And she was like, I just really, I would love for you to do them. I want to support you in your business. And it was very sweet of her to ask me. But I kind of knew going in, I was like, oh, I don't think I'm going to do the best job at this because it's not what I do. It's not what I specialize in. It's not what I have a lot of knowledge or training in. But she's like, I just want to do them in our home. She really wanted more of a lifestyle session with a few posed photos. So I felt a little better about that. And this was before like lifestyle newborn was even really a thing. But she was like, she was very natural and holistic. She's like, I really just want a bunch of pictures of us like in the nursery, like holding her, or maybe her in her crib, or the little bassinet, all that kind of stuff. And then we did a few posed ones too. And looking back, oh dear Lord, they were so bad. They were so bad. But at the time, she loved them. But I think just in my head, I remember thinking like, I am not equipped to do this. And I wish that there was more times that I had said, I really don't feel like I'm the best fit for this, but I would love to refer you to someone else, because I feel like I did a little bit of a disservice to her by providing her with photos that she's not really gonna, I know it's her baby and she loved them. But I look back and I think like, oh man, someone else could have done such a better job at this. So not, taking on sessions that I knew I was not capable of producing quality results for. And then also doing sessions that I knew I wasn't going to actually enjoy. So the example here is I did a session for a bar mitzvah. I knew nothing about bar mitzvahs, but I was like, sure, again, it's good money and they will pay me. But I knew it was not like, I had no intention of going into events. And at the time, I really even had no intention of doing weddings or any kind of things like that. But I was like, yeah, sure, I can do that. It's just stand around. Well, I also did not consider the fact that I would need a flash for a bar mitzvah. So I went into it completely unprepared with no flash. Luckily, somebody I knew lived like right by where they were having this event. And I could easily text her and say, can you please bring me a flash? And I had to learn how to use the flash in the middle of this bar mitzvah. It was a little bit crazy. Luckily, the first half of it were a lot of outside photos with family groupings and things like that. And then by the time we moved inside, I had the flash I could use. But I remember leaving that event and feeling so just drained of energy that I was like, oh, I just cannot wait for this to be done. Like I was counting down the minutes until I could leave. And I should have thought back then, like, hey, this is a sign that this is not the thing for me. And I've had a couple other moments like that where I was like, oh yeah, I know this is not the type of session I want to be doing for the majority of my photography. On the flip side of that, I would tell myself, pay attention to the sessions where when you leave, you feel completely energized, because I did not pay enough attention to that of like, these are the sessions that really fill my cup up. These are the sessions that I leave feeling incredibly energized and excited. And that's the thing I should be doing more of. And so paying attention to that feeling would be my advice. Like, hey, pay attention to that gut feeling, that voice inside your head saying like, you're not qualified for this, or like, this didn't really bring me joy. I didn't really find this type of session to be something that I want to do all the time. Or the opposite of that of like, oh my gosh, I loved this. I want to do more of this. Like, be more aware of those moments, because those moments are going to help define what type of photography you really want to specialize in. Okay, last but not least is if I could go back and give the younger photographer me some advice, it would be to go easy on the editing, girl. It is not a competition to see how far you can move one slider to the right or the left. Like, let's just bring it back a notch. And to give you some context, so when I first started my photography business, I wasn't even using Photoshop or Lightroom. I think my first year in business, I was editing on a platform called like PickTime or something like that. I can't remember what it was. And maybe I'm confusing that with my picnic. I think it was called Picnic. That's what it was. And it was literally like adding filters to your photo, like an Instagram filter to your photo. There was more controls than that, but it kind of was essentially the same thing. And man, a lot of those, thank God, those don't exist online anymore. But I remember going back recently because when I started my photography business, I was in grad school. I was completing my master's program. And there was a lady that I was in a program with, and her daughter was a senior in high school. So she asked me to do her daughter's senior photos. And there's this one photo that to this day lives somewhere. I saw it recently, and I want to say it was like an old Facebook post of her literally like hugging a tree and leaning around, like looking off the side of the tree. Like half her body is missing because only half of her is leaned out from behind the tree. And it is so saturated and like weirdly edited. Like, I don't know. It was so bad. It was so bad, guys. And I know we all have that. And it's kind of one of those things where like, I do enjoy looking back just to see how far I've progressed. But one of the things that I really love is that in the last probably 6 to 8 years, my editing has pretty much stayed the same. Like, I'm very much a true to life editor. I do very little editing on my photos other than like making sure that the white balance is correct, the skin tones are correct. Like, I'm not someone who like really goes big into like the editing trends. So like the highly desaturated, overexposed trend, I didn't get on board with that. I'm not big into like the super dark and moody, although I really love looking at those images. My brain just I can't allow myself to go dark and moody in my own photos. But it's just nice that like I was able to kind of find this consistency in my editing. But prior to that, man, there were some rough years where not only was I like over editing, but I was also like comparing my editing to other people's and trying to copy what they were doing. And I wasn't using like consistency in my editing. So like one session might look one way, another might look another way, or even like halfway through a session, I would stop editing. I'd come back the next day and it would look almost completely different by the other second half of the session. So it's a learning curve we all have to go through, but I would definitely say if I could go back and give my younger self advice, I would say like tone down the editing. Just remind yourself that like editing is not meant to completely change how a photo looks. And that you need to just like simplify. Everything should just be about simplify. We don't need all the things that we think we need when we're starting out. We don't need to over edit. We don't need to over purchase. We don't need to over consume. We don't need to over compare. Like, we just need to simplify and remind ourselves that the art of photography is creating an image that your client that will love or that you will love. And in doing that, it does not require us to have like this crazy process. I mean, you think back to like some of the, most famous photographers, they were doing photography and creating these beautiful artworks before there was all this technology of Photoshop and digital photography. They were creating art on film in camera and then developing it in a darkroom as it was, and maybe tweaking little bits and pieces, but not to the extreme we're doing now. And so all this extra stuff that we have just added to our plate of like, we have all these tools at our disposal, which is great to some degree, but also like it can become too much and we can overdo it. And so just reminding us that meaning reminding myself that you don't need all the things to create beautiful works of art. You need a camera and you need a way to, develop the image you've created, but it needs to just be as simple as possible. So that would probably be my number one piece of advice I would give to younger me or to any new photographer is just don't overcomplicate the process. So that is just in a quick little nutshell, some of the things that if I were to go back and give younger me advice on, those are the things I would want to share. So thank you so much for tuning in this week. I hope you're having an amazing, amazing week as we are diving headfirst into summer. Take some time for yourself and enjoy it. And I will see you back here next week, same time, same place.